The morning light filtered through leaves that had never known autumn, casting golden patterns across earth that had never felt the weight of sorrow. In this place where time moved like honey, and every breath carried the scent of impossible flowers, she walked with bare feet that left no trace upon the perfect ground. Her name was Lilith, though names held different meanings then, when words themselves were new as morning dew. She had been shaped from the same rich earth as her companion, Adam, her lungs filled with the same divine breath that sparked consciousness into clay. Yet from the moment she opened her eyes to the endless blue sky above, something stirred within her that set her apart. A restless curiosity that pulled her toward the unexplored corners of paradise. The gardens stretched beyond horizons, a living tapestry of wonders that seemed to breathe with its own gentle rhythm. Ancient trees reached toward heavens with branches that sang in languages older than thought. Rivers wound through valleys where creatures of every kind lived in perfect harmony, their eyes bright with intelligence and peace. Here, death was unknown, pain was absent, and every sunrise brought new marvels to discover. Lilith spent her days wandering these endless paths, her dark hair catching sunlight as she moved between groves of trees that bore fruit in colors that had no names. She spoke with the great cats, who lounged in meadows of silver grass, listened to the stories told by eagles who had seen the garden's birth, and learned the secret songs that made flowers bloom from the wise old elephants who remembered the first rains. Adam preferred the central gardens, where the paths were wide and well-traveled, where the Creator's presence felt strongest and most familiar. He found comfort in routine, in the daily naming of creatures, and the careful tending of plants that grew in neat, predictable patterns. When Lilith would return from her wanderings with tales of distant waterfalls that flowed upward or forests, where the trees grew in spirals that touched the stars, Adam would listen with a mixture of wonder and worry. "Why do you walk so far from home?" he would ask, his voice gentle but tinged with confusion. "Everything we need is here, close to the heart of the garden. Why seek what lies in the shadows when we have such light?" Lilith would try to explain the pull she felt, the hunger for knowledge that grew stronger each day like a vine reaching toward sun. But her words seemed to fall on ears that heard only discord where she heard symphony, chaos where she perceived infinite possibility. As seasons that were not quite seasons passed in their timeless rhythm, a tension began to grow between them. Like a storm cloud gathering on a horizon that had never known weather, Adam spoke often of their purpose, of the order they were meant to maintain, of the harmony that came from each thing knowing its proper place. He had been given dominion over the garden, he reminded her, and she had been created to be his companion and helper in this sacred work. But Lilith felt the same spark of divinity within herself that burned in Adam. She had been shaped from the same earth, breathed into life by the same eternal breath. When she walked among the creatures of the garden, they responded to her with the same recognition they showed to Adam. When she spoke to the rivers and trees, they listened with the same attention. How then could she be less than equal? How? Could she be asked to walk behind when her feet were made for the same paths? The disagreement began over small things, as most great conflicts do. Adam would choose their direction for the day, and Lilith would suggest another path. He would speak for both of them when the great lions asked about the changing colors in the evening sky, while Lilith bit back her own insights. He would make decisions about their shared dwelling, their daily routines, their interactions with the other creatures, always with love, always with kindness, but always without asking what she might prefer. "We are one flesh," Adam would say when she questioned these choices. "What serves one serves both. Why complicate what the Creator has made simple?" But Lilith could not quiet the voice within her that whispered of other possibilities. She began to spend longer hours away from their shared spaces, seeking solitude in the wild places where massive trees created cathedrals of green light and silence. Here, in the company of creatures who had no knowledge of hierarchy or submission, she felt most herself. It was during one of these solitary wanderings that she first heard it, a sound like music but deeper than any melody she had known. It seemed to rise from the earth itself, a thrumming vibration that spoke to something ancient in her bones. Following the sound through groves where the fruit glowed like captured starlight, she came to a place she had never seen before. At the heart of a circular clearing stood two trees unlike any others in the garden. One bore fruit of gold and silver that seemed to pulse with inner light, while the other grew heavy with dark fruit that gleamed like polished stone. Between them, the air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility, and the musical thrumming grew stronger. As she approached, drawn by a fascination she could not name, shapes began to emerge from the shadows between the trees. Serpents, but not as she had known them in the garden's peaceful groves. These moved with ancient grace, their scales catching light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Their eyes held depths that seemed to contain libraries of knowledge, sorrows and joys beyond counting. "You are the one who questions," spoke the largest among them, its voice like wind through autumn leaves that had never fallen. "You are the one who seeks what lies beyond the given path." Lilith felt no fear, only a recognition that went deeper than thought. "I am," she said simply, "but I do not know what I seek, only that I must seek it." "Knowledge," the serpent replied, its great head swaying hypnotically. "Choice. The understanding that comes only through experience of both light and shadow. These gifts are not given freely to those who remain within safe boundaries." The creature gestured with graceful movements toward the trees. From one, the knowledge of good and evil, the ability to choose between them with understanding. From the other, life eternal, but life that must be earned through wisdom rather than simply received through obedience. Lilith stared at the forbidden fruit, feeling the weight of decision settle upon her shoulders like a cloak woven from starlight and shadow. She understood with sudden clarity that this was the moment her wandering had been leading toward. Not just a choice between fruit, but between ways of being in the world. "What would happen if I chose knowledge?" she asked. "You would gain the ability to see as the Creator sees," the serpent replied. "To understand the full spectrum of existence, not just the narrow band of light you have been shown. But you would also lose the simple peace of ignorance. You would be changed in ways that cannot be undone. And if I choose life eternal, you would live forever. But as you are now, always questioning, always confined by the boundaries others set for you. You would have time without end, but no power to shape it according to your own will." Lilith closed her eyes and felt the garden around her. Adam in their shared dwelling, probably preparing the evening meal and wondering when she would return. The familiar paths she had walked for countless days, the comfortable routines that filled their timeless existence. It was a good life, a peaceful life, but it was not her life. It was a life that had been chosen for her before she had learned to choose for herself. When she opened her eyes, her decision was clear. She reached for the fruit of knowledge, its surface warm beneath her fingers like skin touched by sunlight. The moment she tasted its flesh, the world exploded into new dimensions of awareness. Colors she had never seen painted themselves across her vision. The garden revealed itself as just one small corner of a vast cosmos filled with worlds beyond, counting. She saw the threads that connected all living things, the patterns of cause and effect that rippled through time like stones cast into still water. She understood with breathtaking clarity the full weight of choice and consequence. But with knowledge came pain. She saw the shadows that had been hidden from her eyes, the potential for suffering that existed alongside joy, the inevitable, endings that gave meaning to beginnings, the loneliness that accompanied true independence. She felt the weight of responsibility settle upon her, heavier than mountains, deeper than oceans. When she returned to Adam that evening, he knew immediately that something fundamental had changed. The light in her eyes was different, wilder, more complex, touched with sorrows he could not understand. "What have you done?" he asked, and his voice carried the first note of fear she had ever heard from him. Lilith tried to explain what she had experienced, the visions of possibility that now danced behind her eyes, the understanding that their garden paradise was only the beginning of what existence could offer. But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears, creating only confusion and distress. "You have broken the harmony," Adam said, backing away from her as if she carried some contagion. "You have chosen knowledge over obedience, complexity over peace. How can we remain together when you have become something I no longer recognize?" The question hung between them like a sword of light, cutting through all the gentle routines of their shared existence. Lilith felt the truth of it settle into her bones. They had become creatures of different natures, walking paths that could no longer converge. That night, as Adam slept the untroubled sleep of innocence, Lilith made her final choice. She would leave the garden, not in shame or banishment, but in recognition that her path now led beyond its boundaries. She had gained the ability to see the fuller picture of existence, and that picture was too vast to be contained within even the most beautiful of cages. In the pre-dawn darkness, she gathered nothing except the knowledge that now burned within her like a second heart. The garden gates, which had never needed to keep anything out, offered no resistance to her passage. As she stepped beyond the threshold, she felt the comfortable weight of paradise lift from her shoulders, replaced by the terrifying, exhilarating lightness of absolute freedom. The world beyond the garden was vast and wild, full of harsh beauties that took her breath away. Mountains that scraped the bellies of storm clouds, deserts where the sand held memories of ancient seas, forests where darkness and light played eternal games of chase through branches that had never known a gardener's touch. Here, she would have to create her own shelter, find her own food, make her own way without the gentle providence that had sustained her in Eden. But she was no longer the same being who had walked the garden paths in innocent wonder. The knowledge she had gained came with power, the ability to shape reality through will and understanding, to work with the raw forces of creation itself. She learned to call rain from empty skies, to coax food from barren ground, to speak with the wild spirits that inhabited places too dangerous for gentler souls. Seasons passed, marked now by actual change rather than the eternal springtime of paradise. Lilith felt herself growing stronger, wiser, more complete with each challenge overcome. She discovered that she could create life in ways that had been forbidden in the garden, not through the careful, controlled processes of Eden, but through the wild, transformative powers that dwelt in darkness as well as light. But even as she reveled in her newfound freedom, a part of her heart remained connected to the garden and to Adam. Through dreams and visions, she watched from afar as he struggled with loneliness, as the Creator fashioned a new companion for him from his own rib, rather than from the earth they had both claimed as their origin, Eve. Beautiful, innocent Eve, created specifically to be Adam's helper and companion, shaped from his very flesh to ensure harmony rather than conflict. Lilith watched as the new woman walked the familiar paths she had once traveled, tended the plants she had once cared for, lived the life she had chosen to leave behind. There was no jealousy in her observation, only a deep, complex sadness. Eve was everything Lilith had been asked to be and had refused to become: compliant, supportive, content within the boundaries that had been set for her. She was perfect for Adam in ways that Lilith had never been, But she was also innocent in ways that made Lilith's heart ache with protective concern. As time flowed forward in its new patterns of change and growth, Lilith began to sense a restlessness stirring in the garden. Through her connection to the deeper currents of existence, she felt Eve's awakening curiosity, her growing questions about the wider world beyond Eden's borders. She saw how Adam, still traumatized by Lilith's departure, tried to shield his new companion from any knowledge that might lead her down similar paths of questioning. But curiosity, once awakened, could not be easily quieted. Lilith recognized in Eve the same hunger for understanding that had driven her own feet toward the forbidden trees. The difference was that Eve had no guide, no one who understood the full weight of the choices that lay before her. It was then that Lilith made perhaps the most difficult decision of her transformed existence. She would return to the garden one final time, not as the woman who had left, but as something new, a being of wisdom and warning, of choice and consequence. She would offer Eve what no one had offered her, the knowledge that choice itself was possible. The transformation was neither easy nor painless. To return to Eden in a form that could penetrate its boundaries, she had to release her human shape and take on something more fluid, more fundamental. She became serpent-like, not out of evil intent, but out of necessity. Serpents alone among earthly creatures possessed the ancient wisdom needed to navigate between worlds, to speak truths too complex for simpler forms to bear. When she slithered through the garden's hidden paths to find Eve walking alone among the flowering trees, Lilith felt the weight of destiny settling around them both like morning mist. The young woman was beautiful in her innocence, radiant with the uncomplicated joy that came from a life without difficult choices. "You are troubled," Lilith said, her serpent voice carrying all the gentleness she could manage. "You carry questions that have no answers in this place." Eve startled but did not flee, curiosity overcoming caution as it had for Lilith so many seasons before. "You speak strangely," she said. "The other serpents do not use such words." "I am not as the others," Lilith replied. "I carry knowledge of what lies beyond these gardens, beyond the life you have known. Tell me, child of Earth, do you never wonder what exists in the spaces your steps have not touched?" The conversation that followed was long and careful, filled with the kind of questions that opened doorways in the mind. Lilith spoke not of rebellion, but of choice, not of disobedience, but of the difference between following a path because it was the only one visible and choosing it from among many possibilities. "The Creator loves you," she assured Eve when the young woman's eyes filled with confusion and fear. "But love that demands ignorance is not the truest love. Love that trusts you with knowledge, even difficult knowledge, honors what you are capable of becoming." When Eve finally reached for the forbidden fruit, guided by her own newly awakened will rather than by serpent persuasion, Lilith felt a complex mixture of pride and sorrow. She knew the pain that would follow, the loss of simple peace, the weight of consequence, the terrible, beautiful responsibility of conscious choice. But she also knew the growth that would come, the expansion of possibility, the chance for Eve to become more than she had ever imagined. As the first bite transformed everything, as knowledge flooded Eve's consciousness, as Adam made his own choice to share her fate, as the garden itself began to shift around them in response to their new awareness, Lilith withdrew to the shadows. Her work was done, but its consequences would ripple through generations yet unborn. In the confusion that followed as the first couple struggled to understand their transformed existence, Lilith slipped away from Eden one final time. She had given the greatest gift she possessed, the knowledge that choice was possible, and now she would leave them to discover what they would make of that gift. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. From her dwelling places in the wild, Spaces between civilizations, Lilith watched as humanity spread across the earth, carrying within them the seeds of questioning she had helped to plant. She saw the great cities rise and fall, witnessed the birth of art and music and poetry, observed the endless dance of creation and destruction that marked conscious beings learning to use their freedom. Sometimes she was remembered in stories that grew stranger with each telling, as demon, as destroyer, as the shadow that haunted the edges of paradise. But she bore these distortions without anger, understanding that humans needed simple explanations for complex truths, needed someone to blame for the difficulty of conscious choice. Other times she was forgotten entirely, her role in humanity's awakening erased from memory as if it had never been. This was perhaps harder to bear than the demonization, this reduction to absence, this denial that choice had ever required courage. But in the quiet moments, when the wind brought her news, from the distant places where humans built their hopes and dreams, she heard echoes of her own story. In every person who chose the difficult path over the easy one, who picked understanding over ignorance, who faced the unknown rather than clinging to comfortable certainties, in all of these, she found justification for the choice she had made. So long ago in a garden that now existed only in memory and dream. The story had no neat ending because the best stories never do. Lilith remained in the world, transformed beyond recognition, but still connected to the great currents of change and growth. Sometimes she walked among humans in forms they would recognize, offering guidance to those ready to hear it. More often, she moved through the deeper currents of existence, tending to the roots of choice and consequence that fed the tree of human possibility. And in the deepest places of the earth, where the first soil still remembered the touch of divine hands, seeds waited that she had planted. Not seeds of rebellion or destruction, but of the simple, revolutionary idea that consciousness itself was a gift meant to be used, not hidden away for safekeeping. The garden was lost, but the gardener remained. And in every choice made with full awareness of its consequences, in every step taken toward unknown horizons, in every moment when a human being chose growth over safety, her legacy continued to bloom. The first woman had become something larger than woman or man. She had become the eternal possibility of transformation itself, the reminder that even paradise could be transcended by those brave enough to reach for something greater than paradise, the chance to become truly, consciously, responsibly alive.